already transformed the way the world operates. And now I believe we have a chance to do it all again. To be the great explorers of the next era.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on stage today with our panelists. As you're not that many this afternoon yet, if you want to come a little closer, feel free to do so we can actually have a conversation perhaps around this topic that we're going to talk about today, which is assistive technology. My name is Pascal, and I head up AT-Scale, the global partnership for assistive technology, which I'll say a few words about in a second. But first, for those of you here, I'd just like a show of hand. How many of you actually use assistive technology? Or maybe you're not sure whether you use assistive technology. Right. Basically, assistive technology is a term that encompasses many different things, including eyeglasses, hearing aids, wheelchairs, prosthetics, but also digital devices like your smartphone or a screen reader. And it also encompasses the services that go along with these assistive products. Today, access to assistive technology can be quite challenging, despite the fact that they are really life-changing. Right? Somebody can go to school thanks to a wheelchair or eyeglasses. Somebody can go and find work because they now have a prosthetic leg that allows them to leave the house. Or can do remote working thanks to digital technology. Yet, in many parts of the world, access is shockingly low. I'm sure you wouldn't believe me, but in some countries, it's as low as 3% of those who need assistive technology actually having access to it. In high-income countries, that figure is closer to 80, 90%, right? So we really have this massive inequity in access. Now, today we want to talk about digital assistive technology in particular, because I think we see it as potentially game-changing, in particular for people who have visual or hearing or communication impairments. And so we've got an amazing panel that will speak to this from very different but complementary angles. We have Rima from Verizon, Kylie from the World Health Organization, and Ali, who leads DevTalk. Now, let's get started. And maybe if we can do something a little bit concrete and hear about a specific app that you've developed, Ali, with DevTalk. Tell us a little bit about how that works and how it changes people's lives.
Thank you so much. And DevTalk primarily is a digital sign language interpretation services. And it's a mobile app which connects deaf users with certified sign language interpreter, humanly and artificially. By humanly, I mean whenever a deaf person visits your doctor or in a classroom, he or she just log on an app, and maximum of 30 seconds, he or she can be connected with human sign language interpreter via video calling solution. And whenever I say artificially, it's an AI product which translating from text to sign language and voice to sign language. Why? Because according to WHO, it's 500 million deaf community, 466 precisely, who face a particular communication barrier in order to communicate. And over the top, 90% of them unable to read or write their native language. Last but not the least, for 8,000 deaf users, only one sign language interpreter is available. That's why it's very, very important to have a scalable mechanism which every deaf person can easily acquire with in terms of affordability and availability. Over the top, for complex communication, human sign language interpreters always comes into play in order to communicate with the doctor, teacher, or for the legal aspects.
Thank you, Ali. And as you can hear, this is really something that you can imagine how it can change how somebody interacts in society for basic things like healthcare, at school, and so forth. And if Alison was here, because Alison Pace was meant to be on the stage with us today, but she's unfortunately ill, she would have spoken to you about another amazing app called VoiceIt, which basically facilitates speech recognition. So if you think about Alexa or those kinds of tools, they're developed to recognize standard speech. But people who may have a communication impairment then would struggle to be understood. And so thanks to VoiceIt now, there are ways for everybody to be understood. So that's just another example of how digital assistive technology can change things. But there are other aspects to this as well, around not just digital assistive technology, but digital technology more generally that can really be life-changing, especially in lower and middle-income countries where sometimes access can be difficult to have, especially in remote areas and things like that. Kylie, you coming from WHO, look at things from a systems perspective, a very holistic perspective. As I mentioned before, AT is about the product, but also the services that come along with it. Can you speak a little bit more about that, and also how digital technology can really expand the reach of, for example, healthcare?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Pascal. And you've made a really good point that digital assistive technology is not just about the products. We've had a great example of a product from Ali, and then, of course, the other one around VoiceIt. And there are many, many different digital products that are assistive products. But when we talk about this whole area of digital assistive technology, we're thinking about how technology itself can be harnessed in order to increase access across the whole ecosystem that is required in order for people to be able to access the assistive products that they need. And at WHO, we can describe that entire ecosystem just using 5 simple Ps. So we put people at the centre, so that's our first P. We think about the policy frameworks that are needed that will help to ensure that there are not, unforeseen barriers to access. We think about the provision systems that are really important to make sure that people get the support that they need and that the services reach them to be able to access the right product for their specific requirements. And then we need to think about the products, of course, so that's a 4th P, and the procurement, which sort of fits in under there, and the personnel. So the workforce that we really need to be able to upskill to be able to support access. And I think I'll just give you one example of digital technology helping to solve challenges or barriers across the 5 Ps. So let's just take policy, for example. We know that policy is weak in many of the countries, high, low, middle income countries. Policy support for assistive technology is not strong. But in order to strengthen policy, we need really good data. And of course, we can use digital technology to be able to improve the speed and the efficiency with which we can collect data about the need, the unmet need, about people's perceptions of the products that are available, and we can use that, we can analyse it, and we can use it to be able to better inform the policy framework that needs to be strengthened. So that's just one example of thinking about the challenges across the whole ecosystem, the potential digital solution, and what the outcome for that might be in terms of increasing access.
Thanks, Kylie. And maybe just to share one other example that I find really, that I've seen that's quite fascinating, around prosthetic legs, whereby in many countries there are very few places where somebody can go to have a prosthetic leg fitted. And it can be very challenging to go back and forth because it's a process that can take quite a few iterations. But now, thanks to digital technology, there are ways that you can actually scan someone's knee and then send that scan to a central workshop, have the socket fitted, and then sent back nearer to the patient where there's another professional that can help do the final fitting. But it just makes access so much easier. Now, Rima, when you think about technology, which is your bread and butter and your day-to-day work, and you hear us talk about the wonderful potential of digital assistive technology, what comes to mind to you? I'm sure that you see some risks or challenges that come with that.
Well, I would start by saying I think the examples that we're talking about are really wonderful. If I think back in my own career, it has been my bread and butter for a very long time. And the objective of creating the technologies that we all take for granted has been relatively straightforward. It's about connecting people, it's about communication. What's amazing to see is how much broader that technology can enable new use cases, and the ability that it has to bring everybody into inclusion, so digital inclusion. So the challenge I see with some of the technologies that we're talking about and the capabilities that we're developing is that not everybody has access to it. And I think it's important that we understand how we break out that issue. So we are at Mobile World Congress, we are all here and we're all leveraging our phones, but we have to keep in mind that not everyone has access to it, but there are 3 dimensions to that access. So the first is there coverage in the geography that you are in? So the good thing is 95% of the world is covered by some form of cellular coverage. The second aspect of it is usability. And I think you had some great examples. You've got Ali's example, you have the example of the person who wasn't able to join us. Are there tools and capabilities that would allow someone who has that connectivity to leverage that connectivity? Are they able to get the sign language application? Or are they able to be understood if they aren't able to communicate in a way that voice recognition could understand them? So that's the second aspect of digital inclusion, which is usability. And it's very important that we focus on the usability solutions, and it's great to see that we are developing these usability solutions as we have the basic technology available. The third aspect, which is really crucial to being able to allow everyone to have access, is affordability. And when I talk about digital technology, I'm talking about basic digital technology for communications, and that's phones. And right now, there are 2.6 billion people globally that don't have access to the internet and may not be able to afford a phone. So before you can use the app that Ollie develops, or some of the other apps that we are talking about, we need to make sure that we've got that foundational capability available for everyone, and that we make sure that that is done in an affordable fashion. So that is the focus of what I am focused on with what we are doing with Edison Alliance. And then our objective is to find these usability use cases and make sure we make those available across the globe and connect partners who need help with each other.
Thank you, Rima. And I'd love you to say a few more words in a second about the Edison Alliance initiative. But maybe back to you, Kylie. We've already heard a few of the barriers that exist, or some of the requirements that need to be there, usability, affordability, etc. But can you, from your experience on the ground as well and so forth, can you speak to what are some of the very practical barriers that we really need to overcome to increase access, in particular in lower and middle income countries?
Okay, thanks, Pascal. And if anyone's really interested in, what are the big ticket barriers that are preventing people in lower middle income countries from having access, the Global Report on Assistive Technology, which was launched in 2022, provides a really good summary. And you've already touched on one of the very major challenges, which is distance to services. So we know that globally there are about 2.5 billion people that need assistive technology. So that's 1 in 3 of us. But in low-income countries, access is very limited. And a lot of this is due to the fact that the majority of assistive technology services are in urban centres. And that's not where the majority of people in low-income countries, low-middle-income countries live. So that distance that they need to travel in order to access a person and a service and a product that will meet their needs is beyond the capability of people to reach. And there's a couple of things that can be done about that, and digital solutions can support. So one of them is providing better information where there's connectivity, so people can find out more and overcome the barrier of a lack of awareness and understanding of the products that might be available to them through online platforms. And we've seen some incredible transformation happening in China, for example, where they have a nationwide online platform that people can access from anywhere in the country in order to understand the different products that are available to them. And through that platform, they can connect to services. The other types of technology that can support is the use of telehealth, which can really bridge that gap. So, we had the example of the prosthetics, but also fulfilling elements of the service delivery, such as follow-up. That can be done through telehealth. And that might be the service provider connecting with the service user, or it could be the service provider in the more higher level, tertiary level service, connecting to a primary health or community health worker and providing them with the support and the knowledge that's required for them to then support their community member in their access. And I think I'll just touch briefly on workforce shortage. So we know that health systems across low and middle income countries are challenged to meet the services that are needed by the breadth of, the breadth of services for the population. So bringing assistive technology into that service is a real challenge. But with digital technology, we can streamline some of the processes and the steps, and we can shorten the time that's required from a health personnel to deliver a service. For example, using an app to carry out aspects of screening, or using AI to help with some of the complex decision making. I mean, this is sort of more futuristic type work, but it is there and it's possible, and it can help us to bridge some of the major gaps in terms of access when we have the connectivity. Okay.
So maybe then back to you, Rima, and the Edison Alliance. If you could say a bit more about that, and maybe more generally also what Verizon is doing as a leader, as a market leader in the telco space, to try to address some of the barriers that Kylie mentioned.
So the Edison Alliance is something that Verizon is chairing in conjunction with the World Economic Forum. The objective of the Edison Alliance is to provide, to improve the digital inclusiveness for 1 billion lives, so impact positively 1 billion lives. And the way we go about that is by bringing together champions. We are very selective of bringing together public and private governments, NGOs, private enterprise, with the objective of bringing all of these entities together to try to help us reach that goal of 1 billion. All of the things that we are talking about require that basic foundation
Right.
to ensure that you can leverage it, and to ensure that it isn't only available in high-income countries or in cities, but it is available everywhere, low-income, mid-income, cities, countryside.
Right.
So that is our objective, and the reason that we started the Edison Alliance is if we go back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, there's one aspect to all of the SDGs, which actually Verizon and in my previous life we were focused on, which is technology. But it was decided that that would not be a separate sustainable development goal, but that it would be required for all of them. But the problem is that everybody tries to solve the problem instead of creating that foundation. And that's the reason why the Edison Alliance can help to build that foundation to then be able to address all of these things. Specifically, when we pulled together the Edison Alliance, it was right after the pandemic, and the importance of digital technology was even more important during that period of time when we were relying on technology for education, for healthcare, for financial inclusion. So those were the reasons why we decided to focus on digital inclusion and helping in those areas. But everything that we are talking about here definitely benefits from everything that we are doing for digital inclusion.
That's great. Thank you, Rima. And I wish there were more of these efforts and initiatives, especially that bring together public and private, because I think it's only through a collective effort, as you've heard some of the issues that we're talking about today, they're complex issues to resolve, and you need government, you need the private sector, you need development partners, and you need, of course, the innovators on the ground in those places to make a difference. And so maybe back to you, Ali. You've heard Kylie and Rima talk about some of these barriers and challenges and what's being done. Does that resonate with you? I mean, what are some of the things that you're facing day to day as an innovator, as an entrepreneur, trying to get your product to the most people?
Yeah, rightly said. And I'm coming from the background of persons with disabilities. And if we talk about these barriers, currently we have around 180,000 deaf users, active deaf users. But if we eliminate these three barriers, one is the policy barrier, second is the affordability barrier, and third is the access barrier, because access to assistive technology, again, is a bigger chunk, out of which, if we talk about the global south, the 3% of the population which is not able to access this part has that elimination. So if we eliminate these barriers, the user base of DeafTalk can easily be clicking more than 3 to 4 million. The first barrier, which is the policy, is the bigger chunk, because currently we are operating in 5 different markets, and every country has their own set of policies related to assistive tech. It should be a unanimous or a unified policy for across the board. That's one element, because somewhere the smartphones, the high-end smartphones, takes as a luxury, whereas some it's a necessity. And for deaf users, it is a mere necessity in order to optimize for AI element or for the incorporation of sign language interpretation.
Yeah.
So that's one. If we talk about the access to, because in most of the population where we are operating, in particular if we talk about African, the high smartphone is not available. They don't have access. So that's one where we have to pull in the manufacturers, the private sector to invest in particularly. And last but not least, as we talk about the affordability, yes, again, public-private partnership can bring into play where we can eliminate some of the taxes, some tax grants to ease out, or there are certain other policies which can ease out, like, for example, leasing out these accessory technologies to the deaf community or persons with disabilities makes them to access well.
Thank you, Ali. And I just want to comment on two things that you've said. One is as you mentioned, you're looking at this from a disability perspective, which is obviously a critically important group and typically people that are the most users of assistive technology. But an important point to remember is that assistive technology is about everyone, right? I wear eyeglasses, which is assistive technology. I use a smartphone, which is assistive technology. I don't consider myself living with disabilities. Elderly populations, as you grow old, you'll need a wheelchair, you may need a cane, you may need hearing aids. They also are in need and will benefit from digital assistive technology, right? So really it's something that is about everyone. And the second point I wanted to make, and I was glad actually to hear you mention some of the specific challenges you're facing, Ali, because that is what AT Scale, the global partnership for assistive technology that I lead, is trying to tackle together with partners from the private sector, from the public sector, WHO, UNICEF, and others. And one specific thing that I just want to mention is around smartphones. And I think really we need to do much more together to make smartphones and to make sure smartphones are recognized as essential assistive technology. We're together with Google right now doing a large-scale research, as well as with the Global Disability Innovation Hub in 3 countries to generate evidence to demonstrate the positive impact of assistive technology, of smartphones as assistive tech, and to influence policy then, and then to engage also in discussions around financing and how do we get those devices covered, right? We heard in an earlier session, Rima, that you were on as well about, just the sheer cost of a smartphone, which is, at the lowest $150. How do we address that, right? Because that's out of reach for most people who really need it as a life-changing device, right? So clearly lots to do. I want to just give a few minutes for the audience. If you have a question or two for the panel, and then I'll ask the panel to share some parting remarks, last words of wisdom that people can take away with them. But before we get to that, any questions from the audience? No? Okay. Then I'll just take it in turn, starting on my left. Rima, if you want to share a few parting thoughts.
Yeah, I would say let's start with the basics. Let's focus on making sure that we have the fundamental technology in place. And yesterday I was on a panel and somebody asked me, aren't you concerned about the negative impacts of making technology available for everyone, technology, social media, and all of this other stuff? And it's just reassuring to remember this is why we're doing it. And there's a lot more good than there is potential harm.
Right.
And we just need to make sure that we provide these capabilities to everyone so that everyone's society can benefit.
Thank you, Rima. More harm than good, and stick to basics.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Kylie.
I think to add to stick to basics, I would say keep it real. Here we are, but we are thousands and thousands of miles away from the sort of low-income country settings that I think about when I think about increasing access to assistive technology. And so if we're innovating and thinking about potential solutions, particularly digital solutions, my thought there is that we need to focus on what is the major priority challenge that a country itself needs to solve, and use digital technology to solve those country-led challenges. And that means really speaking on the ground to the service users, the service providers, and the government, because honestly, real system change won't happen unless the government is on board, and therefore we need to be thinking about how digital solutions integrate within health systems. I'm from WHO, I'm going to talk about assistive technology in the context of a health service, but we need to be thinking about what is the most important challenge that digital technology can support and work there, and avoid working in silos, which again I think mirrors a little bit about what's been said already. Thanks.
Thank you, Kylie. Focusing on countries, governments, and avoiding the silos.
Yeah.
Ali.
Yeah, and I will coming up with a different one, targeting the bottom of the pyramid. So if we target the bottom of the pyramid, definitely we can include everyone. So SDG says, leave no one behind. Are we leaving deaf people or persons with disabilities leaving behind when we're talking about inclusion in the assistive tech? So whenever we are developing these policies or taking any actions or programs, developing certain fundamental programs, just think how we target bottom of the pyramid, how we can include persons with disabilities and the deaf community, which is one of the target population to check in, because usually we always target the low-hanging one, and we can forget or leave deaf people or person with disability behind. Just try not to leave them behind whenever you're targeting or developing any policies. That's it.
Thank you, Ali. I think that's really important, the bottom of the pyramid and leaving no one behind. Because indeed, we're already off track, the SDGs. But really, if we cannot be truly inclusive, and therefore we are leaving people behind, we'll never reach the SDGs. But I hope that in today's session, you've actually heard some new things, you've learned something, and that you've seen that there are pathways that we can really change things if we all work at it together. Long journey ahead, but it's a good journey and it's a worthwhile journey. Thank you so much for all the panelists. Thanks to the audience, and see you soon.
Thank you.